Is it okay to self-identify as a humanistic Jew? And if so, are there the do's and don'ts? Well, we do have some guidelines for what our movement historically has believed and practiced. We have lots of classes, programs on those that we've done over the years. If you want to drop me a note, I'm happy, Ash, to send you some suggestions for things to look at and see how we presented that. As a humanistic movement, we affirm that people can make up their own minds. Sometimes what they make up their own minds to be isn't what we are. If you make up your own mind and you believe in a personal God that intervenes in the world, okay, you have the right to believe that, but that's not who we are. So it's finding that balance of, articulating what you believe, exploring what other people believe, seeing if what they believe sounds compelling to you, and you might change your mind and agree with them. Our International Institute has a whole class we taught this year on the philosophy of secular humanistic Judaism that went into some of these core questions. On the Institute's YouTube playlist, there's what we call the FAQs of secular humanistic Judaism. So a series of 10 short videos, like 3 to 5 minutes each, exploring these kind of questions of how can you create a new religion, and what do you think about God, and what gives you the right to make changes. All those key questions that define who we are, we do have some answers to them. But the bigger point I want to make is we don't have an inquisition. We don't have a heresy council that is going to expel people for violating the 95 theses that we've written down that you have to recite, or the 13 principles of faith along Maimonides' lines. I believe with perfect faith that Sherwin wine was always right. That's not our approach. Rather, we have our core beliefs as we've articulated in different times and places. We have our liturgy and practice, and let's see if it speaks to you. And we don't assume it's going to be 100% or nothing. I often say to my congregation, I don't want to be part of a community where everyone agrees with me all the time. That's called a cult, right? I like arguing. I like disagreeing. Occasionally I like losing because it shows that I'm not a dictator. So it works to have a variety of perspectives as long as you have sort of some common core values and shared consensus that makes sense. Look, I'll support an organization I agree with 80% of the time. Doesn't have to be 100%. I remember in the 1990s, there was the Gulf War in the early 1990s. And there were some people who tried to claim conscientious objection from serving in the Army Reserve for that war. And I thought to myself, well, you took the money for college. You signed up for the Army Reserve. Like, you're not a pacifist. You signed up for the Army. You just don't like that war. And that isn't necessarily how it works. Now, I didn't quit the ACLU. I disagreed with them on that issue, but I valued a lot of other issues that they covered at the same time. So this was one of those cases where in a community setting, you might agree with what I say 85, 90% of the time, and sometimes you don't. You might like certain things that a humanistic Jewish community does, but you really wish that they would recite the traditional Hadash and the traditional Amidah standing prayer, and why can't they just hold their nose and say those words? So it's not going to be the perfect fit for you at all times in all ways. But if it's a close enough fit, then look, that value of pluralism we have applies internally too. But just like you have a limit to your pluralism, you can't be everything to everybody. There's an old Yiddish saying, you shouldn't be so open-minded that your brain falls out. At some point, you have boundaries, but within those boundaries, you can be flexible and celebrate the fact that we disagree. One of the slogans that my congregation uses sometimes is, we are like-minded people who don't think alike. I like to think that sort of sums it up. We have similar values and approaches, but we don't have to agree on everything. And in fact, it's good that we disagree, because then we can share a variety of perspectives.
As I listen to you and go back to my own history, which was a German Orthodox family, refugees, I think your openness has so much to do with your origin through a humanistic Judaism, that once you start with God and rules, any disagreements become, how shall I say it? Intense fights about very little things. And
I have to stop you there though, Milt, because some of the most intense battles ever in Jewish history were between two different groups of Jewish atheists. So you would have different varieties of Zionism. So at one time there was labor Zionist A and labor Zionist B.
I didn't know that.
Because one was pro-Soviet and one was anti-Soviet, but neither one wanted to give up the title of labor Zionist. Or think about the internecine struggles in the Communist Party that were, over which subtlety of the Trotskyites versus the Stalinites. These people are atheists. But
okay, I didn't appreciate that.
As you say, it's the narcissism of small difference.
Right.
The battles are so intense because the stakes are so low, because the differences are so small. And I'll be honest. One thing that Sherwin Wine, our founding thinker, was a pluralist the way I presented it. He was from the era and of the school that I'm right and they're wrong. He was not a live and let live. He was those rabbis out there and those Jews out there who are saying all those words they don't believe are, they don't have integrity, and we do. That's his style of presenting it. And the way I try to present it is they're differing values. They are preserving the continuity of saying the old words over the clarity of saying what they truly believe. And so they have a value and we have a value, and we make different balancing acts. But I had to find my way to that formulation because that wasn't how I was taught. Our movement was very much a breakaway from an establishment movement and trying to define itself in very clear terms as this is what we are, boom, boom, boom. And if you read some of Sherwin Wine's writing, there's a whole tribute website called sherwinwine.com. You can find all kinds of essays, audio lectures, and so on. You'll hear a bit of that tone that's very all or nothing. And he certainly would have argued for a diverse Jewish community being a good thing because it would include him. But his style was much less live and let live and more I have a place here because I'm right. Now, truth be told, some people like that approach. Maybe I'm too wishy-washy. Our movement might be better served by the fire eaters and the flamethrowers. But I find if I want to be tolerated, I should be a little bit tolerant in the other direction. Someone asked a too broad question. What is the future of Judaism? Well, first of all, I can't see the future. I often make the joke that we are a non-profit Jewish organization. Ha ha ha, right? No prophecy. But we can try and extrapolate. We know that the American Jewish community is only going to become more diverse racially, ethnically, and in practice. We know that Jews are going to secularize. That's the case. You can see it in the younger generations are more secular than the younger ones 15 and 20 years ago. So there are going to be more secularized Jews out there. That doesn't mean they're all going to join humanistic Jewish communities, because maybe part of secularism for them is not being a member of anything. That doesn't automatically land in our laps as a benefit. We are going to have a widening split between the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox world and the more liberalized world. I talked about the rejectionists versus the integrationists. Those are only going to get more intense. And, Israel's going to be a fault line where that same battle is being played out. The people on the streets are the more secularized, the more liberal, and the ones in favor of this reform proposal are the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox. Now, there are some modern Orthodox who are opposed to the reforms because they believe in good governance. And there are some secularists who are more like ultranationalists and want the Supreme Court out of the way in doing the things they want to do. But by and large, it's breaking down along those similar lines. And, that schism there is being part of a schism here. So I project more disunity, but hopefully the ones who wind up on the same side of the split find a way to get along with each other, as opposed to competing for what they see as a shrinking pie. I think that's going to be more destructive than helpful. Yeah, Lori.
So on that same theme, there's an increasing secularization of American society, where more and more, where the nuns have grown larger. I don't mean N-U-N, but N-O-N-E, and they're not churched. And something like more than 50% of American Jews don't belong to synagogue, any synagogue at all. So what happens to, I mean, I know you can't tell the future, but it seems to me that if there's no organization that they're belonging to, what about things like bar mitzvahs and the traditions of high holidays and things? I mean, what happens to that if they don't?
Well, look, I do many fewer weddings now than Rabbi Daniel Friedman, who's my predecessor, did when he was doing weddings 30 years ago. First of all, he was one of the only rabbis willing to do intermarriages at the time, where now there are still a small number, but a larger number of rabbis willing to do them. And secondly, a lot of people aren't getting married at all. And third, a number of the ones that are getting married are having a friend do the wedding, because it's a DIY world, right? You can get a YouTube video of how to do anything, including how to do weddings. It's gone so far that not just are people able to be ordained on the internet, and you can get ordained for a day or for life, the Church of Judaism and the Universal Life Church and a million other options are out there. But even a website that was designed to refer rabbis to do weddings now also has a do-it-yourself guide of how to make your own Jewish wedding, because enough people wanted it that they had to provide it, even if it undercuts the people they're supposed to be referring for the ceremony. Some people want a rabbi, that's fine, but many people don't feel like they need one. If they didn't have a rabbi permanently for the wedding, then do they need one for a baby welcoming event? And if they want to have a bar mitzvah, can they maybe just hire someone to tutor the kid for a while? Do it as a private thing with their family and friends? Why should they have to pay all that money and spend all that time and jump through all those hoops to go to an institution that's going to tell them they're doing it wrong? Why put yourself through that? If the goal is a party, have a party. If the goal is some kind of ceremony, hire someone to do a ceremony. Who needs a synagogue? And the irony is, that was actually the dominant style in American Judaism in the 1920s and 30s. Affiliation rates were a lot lower then. From the secularized Jews of that era, who didn't want to pay for a synagogue, they'd hire a rabbi, tutor the kids for 6 months, and do an event with a bar mitzvah. Ta-da! Done. The affiliation rates grew as Jews moved into the suburbs in the 50s and 60s, weren't living in dense Jewish neighborhoods where their Jewishness was imposed on them by language, by culture, by surroundings, by diet, by the neighbors throwing stones at them. Like, there were a lot of ways to know you were Jewish back then. Once you move out to the suburbs, maybe your name is changed, you speak good English, you have a college degree, you're living in a suburb like everybody else. That's when people tended to join more synagogues, and the affiliation rates went up in the 50s and 60s to much higher levels. And maybe now they're reverting back to the mean of the ones who want it will join, and the ones who don't might join for a short time or just might not join at all. The idea of joining a synagogue in your 20s and staying there until you're dead is not the common experience anymore. Plus, who stays in one place their whole life until they die, right? From the time they have their first kids all the way until, people move, they retire. I mean, I heard stories from people in Florida where people would show up at high holidays and say, I paid dues at my synagogue back in New Jersey. And they were lying just to get free tickets to high holiday services. And I thought to myself, like, if you really believe in a judging God and you're going to synagogue to forgive your sins, do you really think lying about having bought tickets is the best strategy to get in here? But, it's not for me to judge. So, the old models are changing, and Jewish communities have had to shift. In our own congregation, about, I want to say 6 years ago, we decided to shift how we handle dues. So instead of having a fixed dues amount that everyone was expected to pay, and if you couldn't afford it, you had to ask for special help. We didn't ask for tax returns, which some congregations actually do, believe it or not.
Wow.
But we still had somebody, if they couldn't afford to pay what the list price was, then you had to ask for some kind of help. And then we'd allow you to draw. And about 6 years ago, we said, this isn't the way things work these days. We're not a country club or the opera. And so we decided to change our dues system. We still have a recommended dues level, but then we also have an option that's called a contributing membership, where people can choose what they want to pay as a member. And we give some guidelines of, if you're trying it out for your first year, maybe this much, here's our minimum to cover our expenses, So people have some education about what our costs are. But in the end, we didn't want money to be a barrier to people finding a meaningful community. That was part of our philosophy, right? We want to open doors and include people. Well, let's change how we do money to match it. And when we did it, we were one of the first congregations in the area. And by now, I would say a majority of the congregations in our geographic area have some variety of a choose your own dues option, because the world has shifted and they realize the community doesn't have the leverage. When everyone had to join somewhere, you could charge what you wanted and they had to pay it. But now, when doing nothing's an option, you got to come up with something else. The other advantage of that model, honestly, is we don't have to deal with an out-of-town membership. We can have members in Wisconsin and New Mexico and Michigan, and they choose what they want to pay, and they're members, and that's it. And honestly, as we're doing most things online or hybrid online and in person, they can have as much access to programming as they want. So really, it was a step forward in the right direction. I'm glad we made that step. We're not as ahead of the curve as we used to be, though, because the curve is moving and everyone's catching up. So that's also how things change. So what will happen in the future? I mean, it may be that our community will be sustained by event payment. So someone will have to pay to register for a program that's online or that's in person rather than paying dues. They pay a la carte, right? You go to hear a lecture at the library and it's $3 admission or whatever. You pay for the program. Maybe ours is going to have to shift to something like that because people aren't going to want to be members. Or you get them a punch card and they buy like a 10 lecture series and they boop, 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 and you pop out the little holes and then when they want 10 more, they'll do 10 more. You got to do with what works. People used to buy season tickets to theaters, subscribing to theaters. And some people still do that. And some people buy the 3-seat, the 3-show package, and they get to pick and choose. You need flexible options. And so that's how we're going to survive, is responding to reality and being flexible. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming in. It was great to see all of your faces and to have a chance to talk about the history and hopefully the future of Jewish pluralism. Maybe move further past plurality and further into tolerant referral pluralism. I think it's the only way we're going to survive, because saying each other's wrong doesn't work anymore. But if it's right for you, then it's right for you.